Spirit School. The light beings entered the corridor to the light room, not knowing quite what to expect. They had all received their calling and all were eager to leave the tales from the universe behind that they had all been sharing from their pilgrimages in the ether. They were now to embark on to the next level within a new spirit school. There were a couple of subtle beings still sharing an ethereal joke. Although they did not speak the same language, they communicated with their minds, and that was how they were able to converse and understand each other. Zionite, did you hear about the collapsion that opened a portal to an alternate dimension? No, the dork replied. The Zionite went on, well, there was this collapsion that opened a portal into an alternate dimension. A little burst of laughter exploded from his lips. He regained his composure and carried on with his joke. Well, on Collapsia, as everybody knows, the physical beings at the top of the pecking order are plants. Of course, the dork replied. Well, not only are they plants and the main species of the other planet are animal, but their world was 40 times larger than the world at the other end of the port. Plus, because it was in another dimension, it had a different time frame, it was slower. In comparison, it would take him 30 minutes to say a simple hello. What was the other world? Asked the dork. It was Zambusan, the Zionite replied. Okay, the dork replied. Well, there was this Zambusan spiritual pilgrim waking from an afternoon nap in the wilderness that saw the collapsion manifest before his very eyes. They both let out a giggle in unison. Well, this Zambusan thought that the Great Spirit had created it for refreshment as a reward for his social and sensory deprivation. It being vegetation and all and just standing there looking so fruitful, the collapsion was a hermaphrodite and was also several months pregnant, explained the Zionite. Well, the collapsion, having successfully made the alternate dimensional trip, tried the act of universal telepathic communication. There was another semi-stifled giggle from both subtle beings, and then he went on. Of course, it being such a diverse time frame and all, and the Zambusan not as yet at the level of inter-universal telepathic communication. All the Zambusan would have heard, if he was paying attention, which he was not, was a low humming sound in his brain that eventually would form in, say, in half an hour or so. In his time frame, a formal greeting. There was a short pause and then, so, it was then that the Zambusan mistook the alternate dimensional meeting as an act of grace, because of the size difference as well. The Zambusan mistook the collapsion as a fruit tree and ate the embryonic children. They both let out a hysterical roar of laughter as they proceeded toward the chairs that had been placed in rows for the spiritual seminar in the light room. I remember your species, remarked the dork to the Zionite. Didn't you have pale blue skin with flashes of deep purple flittering on and off from time to time? Yes, that's right. We used to work hard all spring, autumn and summer, then hibernate throughout the winter. Although we did not just passively sleep, we used dream work to enhance our soul, the Zionite replied. That's interesting, remarked the dork. The spy that never was. On a serious note, when you were learning in the physical dimensions, were you ever a spy? Asked the dork of the Zionite. Well, it's funny you should ask that, replied the Zionite. For I was a spy, and it was not just in the learning stages when our planet still had warring factions or civil boundaries, like your run-of-the-mill kind of spy. No, it was in the time when all the countries had combined into one world, one government, or so we thought. Anyway, it was in a time where a great majority of us were traversing into the future for the Promised Land. The Promised Land? asked the dork. Yes, this was in a time when our precogs, who were working for the world government, stripped away the barriers of time as they began getting images of our future. As soon as the time barrier came crashing down, our future species telepaths began giving us formulas and messages from our future of a way in which we could avoid an inevitable global catastrophe. The way in which they set up communication was with a team of telepaths that would, as a group consciousness, send out thought waves, which would activate the time ripples into the ether where it could be picked up with our telepathic precogs from our time and relayed to our governing bodies and officials, so we could get things done. Time ripples, which hold information that can be decoded or tapped and utilized by precogs, can be activated in two ways. They can be sent by telepaths, as I just said, or they can come from natural or unnatural disasters. Apparently, it was not a matter of choice. It was a matter of all importance that we complied with their demands. See, overpopulation, bad psychology and pollution would not destroy our world if we did not comply, we were told. It was a super virus in our future that would almost eradicate every animal, including our species on our planet. It was so simple. All we had to do was take a trip into our future, when our technology had developed the means to vacate our planet through gateways and relocate on other suitable worlds that were ready and waiting for us. How could that eradicate the virus? The dork asked the Zionite. The Zionite smiled a warm, loving smile as he appreciated the dork's astute and intelligent mind. Well, it was said that the virus came and spread from the ghettos 3,000 years into our future because of their bad hygiene, squalid lodgings, and poor living standards. So, if the poor were relocated 6,500 years into the future, for that was where the messages were coming from, and then shipped off to new empty yet fertile worlds where they could multiply and prosper, the virus would never actually take hold in the first place. The world government set up a system where every poor male and female were given a small amount of credits in a global enterprise that had been set up for the occasion. So when one arrived into the future, their credits had become so vast that it would pay for not only the journey to one's new home, but would also set one up financially when one arrived on their new planet. The Council of Seven, for that is what the telepathic group from the future had come to be known, sent the technology back in time to our precogs to help us make the time leap. They gave us the gateway technology, but we could not use it, for in order to do that we needed to set up a huge particle accelerator in space, the reason being that we needed a place with no resistance, which meant no air or gravity. They shared with us their wisdom that we would have to split the atom and then bombard it with photons and create a wormhole that would eventually become stable with a radiation feedback compensator and then become the gateway. But we all knew that we lacked the means and funding, so they gave us the technology to build space-time ships instead, which would be in harmony with our budget. The time travelers were genetically modified, so they could prolong their life cycles to outlive their cosmic journey which was ahead. Their ships traveled at near light speed journeys in a space-time motorway loop, only to break the loop to return into our future at the precise date which they had specified. The time loops, as they became known, were like large orbits, not that unlike asteroids or comets, as they traverse along their natural paths, and of course, what was 10 days for the time as space travelers was 50 years for the people who stayed put on the planet. We already knew that the closer one gets to the speed of light, the more time slows down, so we were not blind to their suggestions. They gave us the coordinates, along with the speed and technology, and told us it was our destinies, and that they would look forward to greeting us in our joint future. For those who had great wealth and land, They were advised not to travel, for they were the ones who would survive the forthcoming global tragedy in the original timeline. At the same time, it would be their genes that would create the future Zion race, and if they left, there would be no one in the future to greet them. So, they were told that it was their duty and responsibility to stay put and keep the timeline open. On top of that, they were also advised that someone had to take the responsibility to upkeep the well-being of the planet and run the system for the migration. Further, if everyone made the space, the time jump, the timeline would be snuffed out altogether. No one bothered to question them, for it made a lot of sense that the poor should be the ones to make the journey, for it was the poor who had died in the original timeline. So, if they went, there would be no chronological genetic upsets that would affect our future race. Our precogs had shown us that our timeline was not fixed, as they saw images of unlimited potential outcomes. They had seen the chaos and the annihilation of nearly every living thing on our planet, along with the paradoxical paradise, long before they had begun receiving messages from our future selves, showing us images of the virus that was to come. When the messages did start coming through, the paradise became even better, as they were shown images of a world where there was no more disease or death, and they were living in harmony with each other and our planet's environment. There were also images of the time-traveling migrants entering the portals to their promised lands, and all we had to do to create this future paradise and safeguard the survival of our species was to instigate our migration into the future. He let the dork reflect upon his message, and then he carried on with his story. So, as I said, when the precogs began receiving messages from our future, we did not suspect anything dark or mischievous. It was when the precogs began receiving mixed messages as to what the future may hold that warranted a covert investigation. When I say mixed messages, I mean that they felt the joy and love of the time travelers' expectancies, and then their fear and confusion, if only for a millisecond, at their point of interplanetary travel. Further, once the migrants vacated the planet for their new worlds, the precogs could find no trace of them. It was theorized by the critics that, of course, they would fear the unknown as they exited the world and the future gateways, and that who knows from our perspective where or when they would end up. However, the counter-argument was that the fear was too short-lived and held no resolutions. It simply dissipated without a trace, and if the precogs could break the boundaries of space-time leading up to the gateways, why should it be different when they journeyed through and beyond the portals? So, it was that I was sent into the future as a spy to find out what was truly occurring. He cleared his throat and then he carried on with his story. When I arrived at the station in the future, there were no contacts there to surreptitiously greet me and help me break away from the maddening crowd, and that aroused my suspicions right from the outset. I had been secretly briefed that there would be, and if not, I was to cautiously slip into Plan B to execute my mission on my own. The precogs had predicted a Force 9 storm would hit around the time of my arrival, and they were not wrong, and it was among the chaos that I made my way out of the depot and eastwards through the city until I reached my base. For thousands of years, there had been a secret location below the subway with all the covert utilities and equipment ready and waiting for my arrival. The underground rooms below the subway had been chosen because they were left untouched, yet abandoned in the future, for in my old time frame the secret passages were no longer used and they had been left to the homeless, the addicts and the social misfits, until of course the social reformation that came along with the time transition. The entrances to the hobos' once dark and dingy cavernous homes had been walled up from the outside after they had been refurnished to fit my future requirements. There was a hidden door at my disposal, and inside there were outfits, phony credentials, a nuclear device and a computer. I logged on as soon as I sat down to get acquainted with the history of my planet that I had miraculously slipped by when I was on my near-light-speed cosmic journey. I was told that information would be downloaded at regular and important intervals throughout my planet's history. I was also informed that I was not to log on to the government's matrix, no matter what the circumstances, in case I was somehow detected, for my cover would be blown. Again, just like Plan A with the failure of my covert contacts awaiting my arrival at the terminus, the computer had ceased to have any input after 3,423 years after my departure. The computer displayed that there had been a major influenza pandemic that had swept through the whole world, nearly wiping my species from the face of our world, and the end result was global chaos. So, I took that to mean that everyone who was secretly involved with my mission had been either killed, or they had simply left their posts for their own survival and forgotten about it. The last entry was that social isolation was our only weapon against the virus, and that all the institutions had been shut down until the virus had been wiped out. Well, this confirmed the virus's rise and demise, but it did not explain what happened to the new arrivals from the past after they entered the portals into their promised lands. My disguise was simple. I was to become a temporary history teacher at an aristocratic college that taught about the migration from the past into the present, and of course there would be records available to me of where the migrants ended up and of their success stories. However, as there were no records 3,423 years after my departure giving me a brief outline of our planet's history, I could not be a teacher, for I would have to research at the Hall of Records via the internet, and as I said, that was strictly prohibited. So, I went to Plan C, in which I was to become a rich socialite and womanizer that was romantically globe-trotting my way around from city to city. Again, the disguise was simple, with a false ID and a large bank account, an infamous womanizing, and a notorious gambling record. I would check in at the best hotel in the city, and from there I was to make my way to their private casinos and mingle with the high and mighty females of my species. Our world was a matriarchal society before the virus had upset the apple cart, and there were still some pretty powerful female officials in our future. It was my job to work my way through and weed out the key members that were involved in the intertransitory time migration process, and subtly ask them the whereabouts of the time travelers in between the sheets, and if there was any foul play, I was to blow up the depot with a nuclear device that was powerful enough to take out the whole city when everyone was arriving from the past. In turn, this would send out a catastrophe wave into the past that the precogs could pick up, and all future time travel, including myself, would cease. Wow, is all the dork could muster. Did you go into the future or not? I mean, what, how, why? I will try and make what actually happened more clear, my friend. As I say, in the original timeline, I did go on the mission, but because I was ready to leave with intent, the explosion that I was going to set off went off in my future, which sent out the time ripple, and so because the precogs picked up on the explosion before I had actually left, I did not have to leave. It's confusing, I know, but just like the precogs could see into the future with the help of the time ripples, so it was that they could see into my future mission too, and we could change it from the past. Because the future is not set, we could change it with intent. This would create a paradox where I did and didn't travel into the future. So we decided against my travel, and the future was changed before it could take hold or be self-actualized, he replied. The dork then asked, why did your future selves turn out so bad as to try and kill all your poor from the past? I mean, why? Let me clarify, my friend, on what actually happened which led to why they turned out so bad and why the mission was set up," replied the Zionite. "I did not find out the whole truth until I had my life review in between lives at the end of that physical death. It turned out that some of the truths that were coming through from our planet's future were true and some were garbled. In the original timeline, the virus did spread like wildfire throughout our planet, and in order to survive, we had to destroy all the animals, for the virus could spread from beast to beast easily. Only vegetation was safe from its destructive force. However, the seed of each species was taken into storage and frozen in a time vault, where they could be brought back into existence when the technology was equipped. As for our own species, we were nearly wiped from the face of our planet, so we went into isolation shelters until it was safe to return to normal. There was no vaccine to be found when the virus hit, or in our future. It seems that some things are just determined to be in our chaotic universe. However, with no animals to keep the virus alive, the virus soon became extinct. After the virus, things were never really the same again. All the poor were dead, for only the rich and powerful had the resources to survive, but a lot of them had been wiped out before they went into their protective shelters. With the modern technology that the survivors possessed, they did not need the poor to help with their needs. So the rich only mourned their dead and were thankful at the loss of the poor. So, they kept their numbers down and lived in harmony as best as they could on their lovely new planet. It took approximately 6,500 years for them to come up with a plan to bring back their dead that they forever mourned, which ironically brought about their own downfall. Knowing that the government departments were using precogs to tap into time ripples to foresee the future before the virus, they devised a plan to rid them of the poor once and for all, and at the same time stop the virus before it could form in the ghettos, thus changing their past and bringing back their dead. I have already told you how they went about it. However, instead of relocating the migrants from the past, they were herding them into the portals and disassembling them atomically and beaming them into space like they said. Only they were never placed on distant new worlds where they would flourish and prosper as they were promised. They were never atomically reassembled. In a nutshell, they were exterminated. Of course, I, the spy that never was, discovered the brutal truth and nuked their fine city, which sent out a time ripple that was picked up by the precogs from the past. Well, in the original timeline, that is. You know what I mean. And you know the rest. After some laughter, the dork asked the Zionite, "What happened when and after the virus eventually hit in your new timeline?" Well, we had learned that the virus was going to originate in the ghettos within the next 3,000 years from the original telepathic residue from the future before the mission was called off. This made way for a global social reformation in which the population was kept down in numbers and all the citizens of our planet were well educated and each were taught useful skills so everybody could be part of the planetary workforce, thus creating a new, safer, and harmonious world in which we all lived. So, it was that blissful paradise that the precogs had seen within our potential future was our final destiny. Basically, we evaded the virus in this way, and we all lived happily ever after. The dork then asked, "Have you ever been incriminated for something that you did not do?" Well, there was this one time when we first began to explore alternate dimensions and parallel worlds that I first stumbled upon a selfish, cruel planet where the natural order of things had been replaced with a dark, twisted, materialistic culture and a negatively sociopathic legal system. I came through the portal full of optimism and naivety and got myself incarcerated within the first few hours. Basically, I came through in what they called a supermarket and found myself surrounded by food, and all the aliens about me were busy foraging and filling up their containers. We had sent messages through to their dimension in the form of crop circles and space-time anomalies to let them know that we were on our way, and that we would soon make the journey in person. By the look of things, I thought that I was expected, because there was a greeting party there to welcome me, although I thought it was funny, because nobody came over to officially address me. They just stood there and gawked. The primal journeys took a lot out of you, and I was famished. So I just dipped into all that food, and I was munching and crunching when 2 humanoid aliens came over and grappled with me and proceeded to arrest me. It took me some time to work out their language system, so I could explain that I was a fellow bipedal humanoid visitor from another dimension, and that I was sorry that I had made an error, and could I just nip back to my dimension and grab something of great sentimental value and exchange it for my pardon. But they would not have any of it, and refused to see my innocence, and took me directly to a holding cell. I could hear in the other cages other victims, and they had all been tortured until they were crazy, or they were just plain crazy to begin with, and so I said my mantra and opened up the portal and went back home. It was then that we began to send our spirit bodies through to check out the rules and the state of the planets before we traveled there physically. They both laughed hysterically, and then the dork said bashfully, "We used to have a materialistic system, and we were all lost in success, power and greed because of it. It was nearly the death of us." And then they laughed even more. That is fantastic. I had a time-traveling experience of my own. Would you like to hear it? The dork asked. I'd love to, my dear friend, please tell, the Zionite replied. Time warp. I remember a life, just before the physical utopian age, where I got caught up in an anomaly, and I ended up back 25 years in the past in a rundown part of the city that had a film studio. When I arrived there, I was shocked, and I eventually got a job as a janitor in the film studio. I told my workmates of my strange tale, and I predicted a few big news events that I remembered from my childhood, just before the events occurred. Most importantly, I found myself in the middle of a famous movie picture, as it was being made. The only trouble is that the film had all the wrong actors. Then, by chance meetings and a series of higher coincidences, I bumped into all the actors who had strange, but lovable idiosyncrasies that they went on to use in the characters of the film, which was the cornerstone to the film's success. While this was going on, the film studio was going broke, and it was in the final stages of liquidation, but I convinced the studio and the director to go on to make this what will be seen in the future as one of the all-time greats. When I predicted that a famous singer would die suddenly and unexpectedly, they eventually believed me, as they saw it the next day on the news on Channel 1. Then, out of the blue, a top actor, who by some unknown reason had stumbled on the script, was willing to put money into the making of the film and the saving of the studio, and everything took on a new light. The film had a star that everyone loved and recognized, the stability that it needed, and then, as I predicted, it was destined to succeed. My health, that was slowly falling apart throughout this whole scenario, finally reached critical mass, and I began to die. I came to the conclusion that the leap in time had laid my fate, but as I laid there on my deathbed, I told the nurse and the priest who were present that I wasn't sorry for how things had turned out, because I had got to help put together my favorite movie. Then I crossed over into the light with peace, love and contentment in my heart. That is an amazing story, my good friend. Would you like me to tell you how I met my chosen soulmate? The Zionite asked. I would love you to. Go ahead, the dork replied. Tightrope. I remember a life where I lived with my parents and my brother on a farm off the beaten track that was 20 miles north of a remote village. My brother was a rebel and cold-hearted because he used to be close to a girl in his early teens, and she got run down by a group of rebellious teenagers and died in the hospital from her injuries when he was 12 years old. After that he went off the rails and became that rebel, and because I was close to him and we went around together, he used to get us both in trouble. Then when he was 18 he contracted a disease that destroyed his immune system from his amorous behavior. Even though his immunity was gone, he still stayed off of the rails, and one day we hitched a ride with a trucker because we wanted to go on an adventure. Now, we lived in the north and the winters were severe and the snows lasted for 6 months of the year until they would thaw in late spring. Unfortunately, we left in the early fall and it looked like we were going to have a pleasant fall that year. But when we were on the road just 50 miles south of our farm, the snow came and we were held up in a small hotel. In the hotel, there were some students, and one of the girls took a shine to my brother and they flirted and kissed. She did not know of his disease, and my brother had forgot to pack his immunity pills, and she had the beginnings of the flu. My brother caught it and he began to die. In the meantime, my mother, realizing that we had taken off, had contacted the authorities of the local town and told them that my brother and I were missing and that my brother had not taken his medication and was in danger of losing his life. They alerted many posts in the area and they went out in their snowmobiles in search of my brother and I. When an officer came into the hotel where we were staying, it was before my brother had caught the flu, and so we lied about our identities and told him that we were students that were on a skiing holiday, because we thought that we were in trouble and were frightened of the consequences. The officer left satisfied, and it was just after that he met the girl and caught the flu. I was really upset and I thought that I was going to lose him. Then another customer turned up at the hotel, and he said that his sister had an immunity deficiency illness too, and that he had picked up ample supplies of medicine for the long hard winter. He said he had more than enough to give my brother some, so that he could save his life. After a while with the medication he recovered and he and the girl fell in love, which healed the wounds of his teenage loss. They settled down together and bought a farm near our parents' farm, and they both went on to live long ordinary lives together. Myself, I ended up as a writer and I moved to a city in the south where it was always sunny, because I was sick and tired of the long hard winters. I eventually met a life partner, and we settled down, and had some kids, and I lived to the ripe old age of 94, where I died naturally in my sleep. After that life, my brother and I always came down together, but never in the same family, and mostly not of the same sex. We would choose our lives together in the light, and after our final crossings, I chose to be the male, and he chose to be the female. We are still together, and she works in the library, which is handy, because as you know I am a student and I frequently go to her workplace for research. He took a pause and then asked, I met him in another life as a woman, would you like to hear it? Go on, the dork said. When two hearts collide. I was with my friends and I was 17, and I had just spent my week's wages on them on drinks and fast food over the last 2 days. It was Sunday evening and I wanted to go clubbing, and there was a girl called Lisa, who I had a childhood crush on, and she wanted to come clubbing with me. We were at the bus stop and I explained that I only had enough money left for myself, so I could not take her out with me, and she stormed off in a mood. I retaliated by proclaiming that she was boring and a money-grabbing cow. Then, as she was nearly out of sight and nearing the corner, I shouted out to her that it was a lie and that I was just angry with her reaction, and I said that if I had had the money, I would have shown her a good time as we painted the town red. I decided not to go out either after that bad start to the evening, because I was no longer in the mood, so I went back to my friends, who were in my childhood house in Marston Lane, Beverley Town. I said to them that if I did not spend all my money on them, I would have definitely got laid tonight. So do not tell me that I do not value my friends, and that I do not put them first. It was then that I noticed over the hedge that divided the houses a young woman with what appeared to be a cauldron, and inside of it there was a purple liquid. I asked her what she was cooking, and she said that she was dyeing her dress for work. I noticed upon inspection that she had 2 rune stones around her neck on a stringed necklace. Having some experience of the runes myself and generally interested, I asked her if she could read them, and she said that she could not, but she intended to one day to understand their meaning and significance. I told her that there was a good book by Ronnie Bulmer that I had read, and he not only explains them in detail, but he teaches you how to use them in divinity, and she said that she would take my advice and definitely look into it. She was a loving political activist, and I was an angry political activist, and we were worlds apart, as our genres were separated by at least 10 years chronologically. 30 years later, I walked into a divinity shop to have my runes read, which I often did, for even though I could read them, you cannot read your own and remain objective. Some guy at the counter was flexing his intellectualism by bragging and showing off with his shallow wisdom. I tried not to get involved, but at the same time he did begin to annoy me somewhat, so I blurted out my knowledge and put him in his place. He shut up and left the shop with his tail between his legs, so to speak. Then a fine-looking woman came to the counter who I had never seen before to attend to my needs, and she was impressed at my knowledge. I then noticed that she wore runes on a necklace around her neck, and she wore a delicate and pretty purple dress, and she was very feminine in her persona. It brought back echoes from the past, and I was sure that she was the girl that I had had a brief encounter with when I was just 17, which I had never forgot. 30 years had passed since that meeting, and that 17-year-old boy was now 47, and was no longer angry and shallow. In the years gone by, I had been in a few whirlwind romances, but only one that was serious, and that was when Lisa, my childhood crush, and I had finally got together. I had spent 15 years with her, and she seemed like she was the one, for we had seen, or so we thought at the time, our futures together written in stone. Eventually, our love dwindled and fell apart, and we managed to keep hold of our friendship even though there was no longer a romantic spark, because we had experienced a lifelong friendship in and out of romance. I was at a crossroads at what to do with my life, so I had gone to the divinity shop to see what my future had in store for me. I asked the woman behind the counter if she used to live at Marston Lane in her youth, and she said that she had. I reminded her of our meeting all them years ago, and she remembered me and our brief encounter, and as we talked we bathed in nostalgia. She told me that she had been working abroad for the past 28 years, but had recently come back, and that she had conquered her ambition, and had taken my advice on attaining that book that I had referred to all them years ago. She still had and treasured it, and said that she could now read the runes, and she understood their divinity, and so she had got a job in this shop, and this was her first day. She gave me a reading, and I got the blank rune, which is known as the destiny rune, in my spread, and we both agreed that it was a synchronicity. She told her work associate, who was standing next to her, watching her reading, our story, and she was impressed. She was still a loving political activist, and now that 30 years had passed me by, so was I, and we could both see the significance of our meeting, and as we were both single, we were destined to at long last be together. We both recognized that we were soul group mates, and that the time was finally right for us to share our future with one another. We began seeing each other after I initiated it by asking her out for a coffee, and we hit it off straight away. We could see that we were truly destined to be romantically entwined in our romance as the weeks went by, soured to untold heights as we went to cafes, bars, restaurants and cinemas. Then my ex-girlfriend Lisa saw her evil ways, and she tried to come back into my life in a romantic way. My best friend, who had felt left out with my new romance, and was somewhat envious of what we shared, told my new girlfriend that my ex and I were rekindling our romantic love. He had always felt part of the gang with my ex, because she was free and flirtatious, but things were not that way with the new love, for she was more refined and devoted to me and me only. So he told her that we were back together, as he tried to break us up. When Judy, my true soulmate, for that was the name of my new lover, found out, it nearly worked, because she was aware of our past history, as we often talked and shared our life stories, warts and all. Because she was not a selfish woman and thought only of my happiness, she did not want to stand in the way if that was my true destiny. However, I told Lisa that what we had had was now gone, and that I had fallen in love with Judy, and she was my true future and destiny. I found out what Jim, my best friend, had done, and although I was annoyed, I could not be cross with him for long, because I could see his reasoning. I explained to him that he would not lose a friend, but gain another one, and we laughed it off. I eventually convinced Judy that there were no romantic feelings between Lisa and I, and that it was us that were meant to have a future together. We did give it another try, and our love blossomed. We never regretted our joint decision, and we live happily ever after. He took a pause and then carried on. We met a few times as the same sex, and our friendship blossomed. Would like to hear one of those lives, my good friend? I would love to, the dork replied. Breaking point. I lived with my foster parents on the wrong side of town, and I was quite happy considering my circumstances, but I was a bit of a practical joker, much to the annoyance of my foster parents. I had a bully for a foster brother who went around with the in crowd. His friends were part of a gang, and they often went on the rampage, beating people up for no just cause, just pleasure. One day, I was joking around, and my foster parents couldn't take it anymore, so they threw me on the street, and I made my way to school for solace. When I was walking down the street, my brother and his gang jumped me and gave me a beating. After they had left, I picked myself up and licked my wounds. I made my way to school, and I was sitting in the classroom when two youths smashed the window and climbed through the shattered glass. They started to beat me, but I fought back. Then one pulled a gun, and in the struggle, it went off, killing the bully in the process. The other bully was enraged and sought revenge for his friend's death, and we fought tooth and nail, hammer and tong. Eventually, I succeeded in overpowering the other bully, and I crushed his head with a sculpture that was on display in the classroom. Then, because of what I had done, I went on the run from the police and my brother's gang, who hunted me. When I was on the run, I saw a police car heading my way, and I ran up a path and hid in a bush for cover, and as the police, who were now on foot, went by, they did not see me. It was then that I noticed a youth from the other side of the pavement looking at me and laughing, but not with malice. He beckoned me to follow him, and as I did, we became instant friends, and we chatted like soul group mates right from the offset. He said that his name was Ian, and that he could find me a place to hide and take shelter. He took me to a disused car park, and he introduced me to his criminal friends, we all got on as thick as thieves. The boys mugged people for a living and I worked with them for a while. I built up a true friendship with Ian, and he told me that he used to be an avid reader of New Age philosophy when living with his foster parents. I said that many a wise sage said that if you believe in yourself, that you can achieve anything. Then I told him that if he went and watched the local bands play, that after the show that he could blag them and tell them that he was a successful small-time manager. I explained that if they let him manage them, that he could lead them on to untold success, and if he told them that he was not of this town, and that is why they had never seen him before, they would probably test him and give him a chance. One day at the back of the car park a few months after I had met my new friends, I saw one of my old friends on the other side of a 5-foot wall calling my name. He told me that I had gotten away with the murders, that they saw it as self-defense, and that my foster parents were sad, and that they had forgiven me and they wanted me to come back home, and I believed him. Mark, that was his name, then told me to climb the wall and go with him to my freedom. Because I was happier in my old life, I decided to go, so I said goodbye to my newfound friends and climbed the wall. But when I got on the other side of the wall, my brother's mates were there hiding, lying in wait, and they assaulted me and stabbed me and I died. He took a pause and then went on with his story. Ian's gang were really upset, and they scaled the wall to take revenge, and my brother's gang fled. As the weeks went by, Ian and his friends got caught mugging someone by the police, and they were arrested on the spot. The police did not recognize Ian as one of the gang, and he said that he had only just met them, and that he did not know them. He gave the police a phony address and telephone number, and because of his false honesty, they did not check it on their computer. They let him go, and carted the other two off for their just deserts in the local jail. He took another break and then carried on. Ian changed his life that day, and he went to a charity shop and bought a suit, some shoes, got a haircut, and had a shave, and that night he went to a local gig and did what I had told him to do. He was an instant success, and eventually he managed 4 bands, one of whom, the Martlets, kept him on as their manager. They were all successful, and Ian went on to have a beautiful life in the rock industry. As I say, my good friend, we met many times, because we planned it in the light, and set our joint destinies together, because we were true chosen soulmates, and we, as I said, are still together, and always will be.